Just before the EU-China summit, EU President Ursula von der Leyen made a detour to Japan, where she reportedly discussed forming a Western rare earth alliance to counter China. This move, enjoying the benefits of cooperation with China on one hand, while secretly plotting de-Sinicization on the other, is seen as the EU's self-inflicted wound. Before heading to China for the EU-China summit, von der Leyen deliberately stopped in Japan. According to reports from Nikkei Asia and Bloomberg, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel met with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba for extensive discussions. The main topic was how to expand economic and trade cooperation between Europe and Japan. Von der Leyen stated that for strategic partners like Europe and Japan, such cooperation means strengthening their relationship to adapt to changing times and shape the future. Both sides should formulate global trade and technology rules based on their shared values of fairness and openness. In von der Leyen's vision, the so-called EU-Japan alliance should possess the potential for a 1+1=2 synergy, capable of resisting the US in the West and China in the East, and qualified to become a supervisor of global supply chains, particularly in core areas such as rare earth materials, automotive batteries, and semiconductors. These are precisely areas where both China and the United States hold significant advantages. By promoting high-profile rare earth cooperation with Japan and building a competitiveness alliance, the EU aims to reduce its reliance on China's rare earth supply chain. One must admit, von der Leyen's plan seems quite ambitious. In March this year, France initiated the construction of Europe's first large-scale rare earth recycling plant, with reported participation from official EU and Japanese agencies and private enterprises. Europeans see this as a positive sign, and are already envisioning a future of grand plans with Japan in the rare earth sector. However, a beautiful vision often clashes with harsh reality. While seemingly a move toward strategic autonomy, this European concept actually exposes their misunderstanding of the global rare earth industry landscape. China's core advantage in the rare earth sector is far from as simple as von der Leyen and her ilk imagine. The value of rare earths cannot be simply reduced to mere mining. More importantly, it's about refining and extraction. While China indeed has exceptional rare earth mineral deposits, the reason its rare earth industry chain is unparalleled globally is not merely due to abundant resources or aggressive mining. The full industrial chain control and technological barriers accumulated over decades are our core competitive strengths. The alternative plan envisioned by von der Leyen for EU-Japan cooperation is essentially an attempt to evade their own shortcomings and a misjudgment of China's industrial strength. From an industrial perspective, China accounts for over 90% of the world's rare earth smelting and separation capacity in the midstream. This advantage stems from difficult-to-replicate technological accumulation, ranging from hundreds of stages of process control in solvent extraction to environmental technologies for treating associated radioactive elements and cost control capabilities in large-scale production. These form a chasm that other countries cannot overcome in the short term. Japan's predicament in the rare earth arena is even more acute than the EU's. This island nation lacks its own mines and has long relied on China for supplies. After the Diaoyu Islands incident in 2010, it faced even greater supply chain risks. Learning from this painful experience, Japan began to globalize its rare earth strategy, cooperating with Vietnam on mining, investing in processing plants in Australia, and even planning to start experimental deep-sea rare earth drilling at a depth of 5,500 meters off Minami Torishima in January 2026. The technical difficulty of this endeavor is comparable to landing on the moon, though commercial application is not expected until after 2040. However, Japan knows that it's difficult to succeed alone. Riding on the EU's coattails this time allows it to access resource-rich areas like Africa and Greenland through Europe, and also to diversify risks. After all, Japan's lesson from India was too profound. In June 2025, India unilaterally terminated its rare earth supply agreement, exposing the fact that it had long been reselling Chinese rare earths, leading to the failure of Japanese invested projects and the squandering of initial investments. Behind this rare earth cooperation, there's also the shadow of the United States. In March this year, the US and Japan signed a critical minerals agreement, allowing Japanese rare earths to enter the US market in exchange for tariff concessions. The EU is currently negotiating a similar agreement with the US, attempting to bypass the trade barriers of the Inflation Reduction Act. Von der Leyen understands that aligning with Japan can both increase leverage in negotiations with the US and prevent the US from picking them off one by one. Von der Leyen's words were even more direct. In the current tense geoeconomic situation, Europe and Japan should huddle together for warmth, formulating global trade and technology rules based on shared values, and jointly controlling critical material supply chains. It's clear to any discerning observer who this is aimed at. Isn't it an attempt to wrestle with China in the critical minerals sector? However, intentions aside, whether this can actually succeed remains a big question mark. But von der Leyen's maneuver at least reveals one issue. The EU still harbors prejudice against China. Some analyses suggest that her detour to Japan before coming to China clearly indicates her belief that negotiations with China will be particularly difficult. This is because the EU has no intention of lifting its more than 20 trade restrictive measures against China. Isn't this a classic case of wanting to benefit without making sacrifices? But Japan isn't so easily fooled. While Japan does have some expertise in niche areas like high-end magnet manufacturing, 80% of its general-purpose rare earth oxides must be imported from China. The entire rare earth industry chain is linked to China's supply chain. Since China implemented controls on rare earth magnet exports in April this year, Japanese automakers have been frantic. If Japan truly dares to blindly follow the EU's lead, their automotive industry might face significant repercussions. Japanese media, however, see the situation clearly. They believe Japan is just like South Korea, deeply tied to China in the critical minerals supply chain, with a solid foundation for cooperation. Moreover, China now implements license management for critical mineral exports, and Japan, along with South Korea and ASEAN, was among the first to obtain permits. Therefore, Japan has no desire to cause new trouble, fearing it might disrupt the hard-won balance. In reality, China has always understood the strategic importance of rare earths for global industrial development. Therefore, while safeguarding its own interests and acting responsibly towards the international community, China has maintained an open attitude towards international cooperation. Even with the EU, as long as it's reasonable and compliant, China is willing to provide rare earth resources to help them develop relevant industries. This fully demonstrates China's sincerity in maintaining the stability of global industrial chains and promoting common development. However, some in the EU are truly ungrateful. While enjoying the convenience brought by Chinese rare earths, they also point fingers and make unwarranted accusations against China, pushing their luck in rare earth cooperation and even attempting to harm China's legitimate rights and interests. Can China tolerate such behavior of eating with one hand and smashing the pot with the other? China's rare earth export control measures are not a joke. They are aimed at safeguarding national security, ensuring the sustainable use of resources, and fulfilling international responsibilities. China has every right and obligation to ensure the rational development and utilization of rare earth resources, preventing resource waste and illegal outflow. If the EU truly wants to cooperate well with China in the rare earth sector, it should drop its petty schemes and approach China with an attitude of equality, respect, and mutual benefit. Stop playing those two-faced games and thinking of stabbing China in the back. That door is firmly shut. Von der Leyen's detour to Japan before her visit to China instantly made the atmosphere of China-EU relations delicate. China's subsequent cool attitude further added gravity to this diplomatic interaction and served as a warning to the EU. Previously, China typically extended a warm welcome to important foreign dignitaries, with diplomatic language full of friendliness. However, this time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs official announcement merely stated that the visit was agreed upon by both China and the EU, notably lacking the usual welcoming terms. This stands in stark contrast to the enthusiastic phrasing used 2 years ago when von der Leyen visited China at China's invitation. This diplomatic cooling reflects an accumulation of recent EU actions that have harmed China-EU relations. Just before the visit announcement, the EU sanctioned Chinese financial institutions on groundless charges and restricted Chinese medical device companies from participating in public tenders over €5 million. Prior to that, it had launched anti-subsidy investigations and other trade restrictive measures against Chinese new energy products. Von der Leyen even sensationalized the issue of China's overcapacity in the European Parliament, accusing China of supporting Russia and exacerbating European insecurity, attempting to force China to cut off normal trade with Russia, completely disregarding China's objective stance of promoting peace talks in the conflict and the vast economic cooperation foundation between China and the EU. From an economic perspective, the EU's actions are even more contradictory. China and the EU have close economic ties, with daily trade exceeding €15 billion. 3 out of every 10 new energy vehicles in the EU are equipped with Chinese batteries. The sales of Germany's 3 major automakers in China in 2024 contributed 42% to their global profits. French wine exports to China have also recovered to 89% of pre-sanction levels. China is not only an important trade partner for the EU, but also a key force in stabilizing its energy prices and ensuring clean energy supply. China has stabilized energy supply chains through local currency settlements, reducing fluctuations in European electricity prices. However, von der Leyen and other EU politicians disregard these facts, attempting to restrict China in trade while simultaneously hoping China will give the EU a free pass in areas like rare earths and economic trade. Such one-sided demands for benefits are doomed to fail. The French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle Strike Group has concluded its 5-month Clemenceau 25 global deployment and returned to Toulon port. Interestingly, Charles de Gaulle's naval officers recently mentioned encountering as many as 40 Chinese naval vessels observing them in the South China Sea during this global deployment. More amusingly, the French Navy even boasted that they directly confronted the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong's task force, but because the French carrier strike group represented immense power, there was no confrontation between the French and Chinese naval carriers. On July 19, according to French media Naval News, after the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group concluded its Clemenceau 2025 exercise in the Indo-Pacific, it unusually disclosed details of its interactions with the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea during a private event. The core maneuver of the French Navy's Indo-Pacific deployment was the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group's entry into the South China Sea, acting as an vanguard to support US freedom of navigation operations. A French naval officer stated in an interview that as soon as the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group entered the Luzon Strait, it found itself being tracked by the Chinese Navy, with the Type 054 missile frigate spotted nearby. A senior French naval officer present added, "Our presence annoyed our rivals and interested them greatly. In an area roughly 3/4 the size of the Mediterranean, we found 30 to 40 Chinese naval vessels. This number is very large, and we also encountered the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong's task force. The climax arrived. The Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group suddenly encountered so many Chinese warships. What should they do?" The only admiral present spoke up. When asked what would happen if a conflict with the Chinese Navy occurred, he said, "We are fully prepared for anything." Of course, the admiral also boasted that there was no conflict or confrontation because the French carrier strike group represents immense power. "We are strong," and prevented conflict. He also stated that the Chinese Navy did not issue any warnings to the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group, because the Chinese Navy's reaction to the Americans may be different from its reaction to the French Navy. Regarding this arrogant and foolish statement, experts directly refuted it, stating that the French carrier strike group was taking itself too seriously. In reality, everyone knows, this is France, punching above its weight. Even American aircraft carriers dare not openly challenge in the South China Sea, let alone the comparatively weak French carrier. Even if the entire French Navy were deployed, it would not be enough to contend with the Southern Theater Command. Analyzing the Charles de Gaulle's true capabilities and China's naval superiority. What is the true strength of the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group? According to the French Navy, it consists of the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, the destroyer Furban, the frigates Provence and Alsace, the fleet replenishment ship Chevalier Paul, and an attack nuclear submarine. In terms of performance, the Furban is the lead ship of the Horizon-class air defense destroyers, equipped with 48 vertical launch systems that can fire Aster-15 and Aster-30 surface-to-air missiles. However, limited by its inferior passive phased array radar, and having been in service for over 20 years, its actual air defense capability lags behind the times. The Provence and Alsace belong to the Aquitaine-class frigates, also enhanced with air defense combat capabilities, equipped with 32 vertical launch systems. Their 6,000-ton displacement is also not significantly different from mainstream European destroyers. But even so, an escort fleet composed of these three air defense destroyers and frigates is still far inferior to the escort formation of China's aircraft carrier Shandong. The Type 055 large destroyer is China's blade-wielding guard for its aircraft carriers. Its 112 vertical launch units are almost equivalent to the total of France's 3 frigates. As for the aircraft carrier itself, the performance difference is even greater. The Charles de Gaulle's air wing carried 22 Rafale fighter jets and 2 E-2C Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, though not at full complement. Previously, its carrier-borne aircraft could conduct about 40-50 sorties per day. In contrast, the Shandong typically carries over 40 J-15 series fighter jets and can conduct over 70 sorties per day. As for the gap in carrier-borne early warning aircraft, in near-shore areas like the South China Sea, the PLA's land-based early warning aircraft can completely compensate. Not to mention the 40 other Chinese naval vessels densely distributed in the South China Sea. Furthermore, in terms of reliability, the Charles de Gaulle is considered a disgrace to nuclear aircraft carriers. It lacks dedicated aircraft carrier nuclear reactors. Its technology is derived from spliced strategic nuclear submarine reactors. Its reliability is simply incomparable to that of proper nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Its maximum speed is only 27 knots, and its low-enriched fuel rods only last for 7.5 years, requiring major overhauls and maintenance frequently. The stability of its nuclear power system is still incomparable to the mature power systems of US Nimitz-class carriers or China's conventional powered aircraft carriers. To consider such a vessel as a powerful force, effectively deterring the PLA, as claimed by the French admiral, only adds a touch of humor to the French admiral's statement. The French side claimed that their forceful entry into the South China Sea did not lead to conflict, attempting to interpret China's restraint as a sign of weakness. However, in reality, China consistently adheres to the Unconvention on the Law of the Sea regarding the freedom of navigation for foreign warships. As long as they do not enter China's territorial waters, China only conducts relevant monitoring. If they attempt to conduct close-in reconnaissance within China's territorial waters, necessary countermeasures will certainly be taken. This time, the French were quite clever. They did not attempt to force their way into the territorial waters near China's islands and reefs in the South China Sea, as US warships have done previously, which resulted in forceful expulsion by the PLA. Instead, they stayed in international waters throughout. The Charles de Gaulle's actions were limited to normal navigation and did not cross China's red line. Therefore, China's use of surveillance methods was consistent with the principle of reciprocity, which is also the main reason why the French officers dared to make provocative statements. Experts state that if the French carrier strike group were to conduct military provocations in the South China Sea, the PLA would be the first to send it to the bottom of the sea. On the South China Sea issue, China demonstrates the responsible attitude of a great power. It will not fire the first shot, but it will certainly not give the enemy a chance to fire the second. And against the entire French nuclear carrier strike group, in reality, the Southern Theater Command's Shandong carrier wouldn't even need to be deployed. Just 4 Type 055 destroyers under the Southern Theater Command's naval destroyer and frigate flotilla would be sufficient to defeat the entire French carrier strike group unscathed. As the world's first dual-band phased array radar, 10000-ton class Aegis destroyer, the technical parameters of the Type 055 need no detailed elaboration. Currently, with the support of core system equipment, the Type 055 already possesses a long-range anti-ship strike radius comparable to, or even exceeding, that of carrier-borne aircraft. Experts state that in wartime, the Type 055's large-caliber universal vertical launch system, capable of both hot and cold launches, can carry hypersonic anti-ship missiles like the YJ-21. The YJ-21 possesses powerful anti-ship strike capabilities, with a range exceeding 1,500 kilometers and a terminal penetration speed of Mach 10, effectively breaking through Western naval vessels' air defense networks. In contrast, the strike radius of the French carrier-borne Rafale fighter is only 1,100–1,200 kilometers, a range that cannot even reach the Type 055. Thanks to China's advancements in missile technology, its main combat vessels possess a strike range exceeding that of carrier-borne aircraft. The Charles de Gaulle would find itself in a passive situation, unable to see, unable to strike, and being destroyed when attempting to strike. Within the system, whether it's the network of ocean reconnaissance satellites covering the entire South China Sea or the PLA's early warning aircraft, they can monitor the French carrier's movements around the clock and provide guidance for the Type 055's YJ-21 hypersonic missiles. Therefore, in a real combat scenario, the Southern Theater Command would only need to dispatch 4 Type 055 destroyers, supported by the reconnaissance system, and a volley of a few dozen YJ-21 missiles at the French carrier fleet would quickly and flawlessly destroy the entire French carrier formation. All in all, the Charles de Gaulle's trip to the South China Sea was essentially a political show, lacking sufficient power but desperately trying to assert its presence. No matter how much the French military boasts, it cannot hide the fact that the current French military is simply not in the PLA's league. The French military does not even deserve to be called a challenging opponent for the PLA. After all, today's France is no longer the world power it once was. The annual tonnage of ships launched and commissioned by the PLA annually equals an entire French navy. As a third-tier country, the French military has neither the qualifications nor the capability to challenge the PLA in the South China Sea. If it truly dares to infringe upon China's sovereignty in the future, it will only bring humiliation upon itself.